As Dean of the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, it is my great privilege and honor to welcome you to the 2021 Paul Volcker Lecture at Syracuse University. First, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people upon whose ancestral lands our university now stands. I would like to thank Professor Lopo and the team in the Center for Policy Research for organizing today's event, and Maxwell staff in Information and Computing Technology for their support. This is a great occasion for Maxwell to host and engage a renowned economist, Dr. Bridget Madrian, whose behavioral economics research has contributed to improving equity and access for millions of individuals by shaping how employer-sponsored savings plans and government's legislative and regulatory efforts to strengthen retirement planning for all Americans has become institutionalized. Today's event also gives us a very special opportunity to acknowledge the many people who have helped make this occasion possible. I want to first thank Bob Menschel, a Syracuse University graduate and trustee from the class of 1951. Bob is an extraordinary business person, philanthropist, and a great citizen who has contributed in so many ways to Syracuse University throughout his lifetime, and his generosity, and especially in his commitment to the Maxwell School. Bob's remarkable philanthropic support established the Paul Volcker Chair and this wonderful annual program. Behavioral economics is a passion for Bob, as someone whose distinguished career has focused on the markets and the economy over the long term. We cannot thank Bob enough for the lasting impact his support means to the Maxwell School. Chairman Volcker's enthusiasm for Syracuse University and the Maxwell School was tremendous. And prior to his passing, his involvement with the Volcker Chair, this annual lecture, and as a member of the Maxwell Advisory Board was invaluable to the school. We are honored to have had the opportunity to work with him and the Volcker Alliance on important issues of public service. I corresponded with Mrs. Volcker just a few days ago to let her know about this year's events in honor of the chairman. He is deeply missed, and I'm grateful to have had a relationship with him. I'm also very pleased to introduce to you the Paul Volcker Chair in Behavioral Economics, Maxwell Professor of Public Administration and International Affairs, Len Berman. Len is the inaugural holder of the Volcker Chair and works both with us and as a fellow at the Urban Institute, where he is a co-founder of the Tax Policy Center, a joint project of the Urban Institute and the Brookings Institution. Len embodies the Maxwell tradition of combining the strengths of theory and practice as a thinker, as a writer, a teacher, and as a public servant. He exemplifies the many ways in which one can serve the public good in addition to government service. Throughout his career at the Treasury Department, working with Congress, as well as his time as a teacher at Maxwell, Len Berman reflects the values that Bob Menschel intended to honor and foster by establishing the Volcker Chair at Maxwell, values which Chairman Volcker reflected on throughout his lifetime. Maxwell is honored by the generosity and service of Paul Volcker, Bob Menschel, and Len Berman. I'm delighted now to introduce the Maxwell School's Paul Volcker Chair in Behavioral Economics, Professor Len Berman.
Sorry, Len, you might be muted right now.
Len, you're still muted.
I've only been doing Zoom for 16 months and I still do that. Thank you, David, for that kind introduction. I always think of what an honor it is to hold a chair in Paul Volcker's honor now in his memory. Before introducing Bridget, I have a few housekeeping items. First, please type any questions you have for Dr. Madrian in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A after the presentation. For this lecture, we will be using closed captioning. If this feature is distracting, please turn it off. The If you click the CC button at the bottom of your screen, you can hide the subtitles. And the lecture is being recorded. I want to thank Katrina Fiocchi, Cole Ware, Andrew Warren, my colleagues at CPR, and Tom Fazio at Syracuse, as well as Jallee Clark at BYU for doing all the behind-the-scenes work to make this event possible. I also want to acknowledge and thank Bob Menschel. He established the Paul Volcker Chair. He endowed the lecture series, today's event, and the student-organized Paul Volcker Symposium, which features the work of scholars at the cutting edge of behavioral economics. That will also be at 4 o'clock tomorrow. The topic is energy and environmental policy, and I hope you can join us. I do want to acknowledge the namesake of my chair in today's event, Paul Volcker, who passed away in 2019. This is the first Paul Volcker lecture since his death. We plan to celebrate his remarkable life at next year's lecture, when I hope we will be able to meet in person. But I want to say what an honor it has been to hold a chair in Paul's honor. He attended every Paul Volcker lecture until his health began to fail. He was a giant of economics, both figuratively and literally. He was 6'8" tall and built like a linebacker. He devoted his life to public service, and he had a huge impact on policy in the US. He is one of my public policy heroes. And Bridget Madrian, today's speaker, is another one. Bridget is the Dean and Marriott Distinguished Professor in the Brigham Young University Marriott School of Business. Her bio is on the Volcker lecture page, and I'm not going to go into detail about it. It would take too long. Her research focuses on behavioral economics and household finance, with a particular focus on household saving and investment behavior, retirement and health behaviors and outcomes. Her doctoral dissertation studied health insurance job lock, people staying in jobs just because they want to keep their health insurance. Bridget found that health insurance job lock reduces job mobility by 25%. This was an important piece of evidence in favor of government policies to make affordable health insurance available, especially for older workers. Bridget's research has covered a range of topics, but it's also always been highly policy relevant and grounded in the real world, not the abstractions of theoretical models or simplified experiments. Her research has revolutionized retirement policy, as David mentioned. It's responsible for millions of people around the world having more retirement savings than they would have otherwise. For a long time, analysts puzzled about why so few people sign up for retirement savings accounts like 401k plans. This is a slide showing participation in retirement plans for people who had to sign an opt-in, had to actually elect to start saving for retirement, often to get valuable matches from their employers and get, perhaps decades worth of tax benefits. And you can see that for the three groups that Bridget and her co-author looked at in the 2001 paper, participation was really low, 35% for women overall, only 13% for people making under $20,000. Well, Bridget decided to check what happens when people are automatically enrolled. What would happen? I mean, in theory, it shouldn't have any effect. I mean, it takes 5 minutes to fill out a little form, say I want to put 3% of my pay into retirement. But it turned out that if you automatically enrolled people in retirement and had them fill out a form to get out of it, to opt out, enrollment just soars up to 86% for women in her sample, up to 80% for people earning under $20,000 a year. This research was so influential that it led to auto-enrollment legislation all around the world. When the UK mandated that firms offer health insurance as an automatic option, automatic enrollment, participation shot up 37%. And that was from a much higher base than in the US. In researching Bridget, I watched a video of a devotional that she led at BYU. The BYU website says that these are addresses from BYU presidents, church leaders, and faculty members that blend disciplines with discipleship, the scholarly with the sacred. Well, when Bridget did her presentation, the title was Harry Potter and the 5 Gospel Truths. What I learned from this was that, first of all, she had a difficult pregnancy and ended up reading Harry Potter books to get through the last couple months of it. Bridget has a great sense of humor. She's intellectually curious. She's deeply spiritual. It turned out Harry Potter actually has a lot of valuable lessons that you can tie to the scriptures. And she is a great teacher. She managed to get the whole Marriott Business School to participate in her Harry Potter obsession for Halloween. This is a photograph of her and her colleagues in 2019. And she's beloved by her students. So she may not be a superhero, but she has her own bobblehead. Dave, as far as I know, doesn't have his own bobblehead. So superhero, policy hero, Bridget Madrian, I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Maxwell School, and I will unshare my screen.
Well, Len, thank you for that overly generous introduction. And I have to say, I think that's the first time in a professional setting that anyone has alluded to my love of Harry Potter. But I figure we all have to have a little bit of fun and maybe a little bit of magic in our lives. So I have titled my remarks today, Thinking Outside Disciplinary Boundaries, Applying Behavioral Insights to the Design of Public Policy. And this is really an overview of how I use behavioral insights to inform the way I approach policy problems. And then I'm going to try and apply that framework, not to my work on how to get people to save for retirement, which Len referred to, but another more minor strand of research that I've worked on, which is how to get people to get vaccinated, because that seems to have some current public policy relevance these days. So the traditional motivations for public policy that I was taught when I was in graduate school and as an undergraduate indeed were, first of all, government intervention might be motivated in the case of market failures. When do markets left alone not work well? And that would include when we have firms that have market power, when we have public goods, when we have either positive or negative externalities, or when we have information failures, when one side of a transaction has more information than another and can use that information advantage to exploit the other side of the transaction. Second would be if we have missing markets. So if the market failures are so severe that the market essentially ceases to exist altogether. And then we might be concerned about the distributional outcomes that we observe if we leave markets to themselves. So these were the broad categories of reasons for market intervention that I was taught when I was a student. And then along with these came a number of what I'm going to call traditional policy tools, traditional levers that policymakers could pull to try and remedy these market failures. So in the case of market power, a firm being so large that it can sway prices and quantities in the marketplace to its advantage, one solution is to have public provision, which leads to natural monopolies. Another would be price regulation. A third traditional tool would be market structure regulation, and these would include things like merger policy or antitrust policy to break large firms up. In the case of public goods, the traditional public policy tools would be things like public provision of public goods. So the public town doing the 4th of July fireworks celebration, direct subsidies to increase the level of private provision, tax subsidies for private provision, and then also regulation, which is a common feature for knowledge-based public goods. In the cases of externalities, the traditional public policy tools would include prices, either taxes in the cases of negative externalities, or subsidies in the case of positive externalities like vaccines, or regulation, which would often take the form of a prohibition against things that generate negative externalities, or a mandate for things that generate positive externalities. And then in the case of information failures, the traditional tools would also include disclosure requirements in addition to things already mentioned like mandates, subsidies, and regulation. So when I was in graduate school, this was the what I'm going to call my public policy toolkit. And as I started doing research into questions that interested me, I discovered that there were in fact other reasons that might motivate government intervention and other policy tools that might be equally or more cost effective than the traditional policy tools that had been the mainstay of policymakers. So I became a behavioral economist in my attempt to better answer public policy questions. So what does behavioral economics bring to public policy? Well, if we think about the public policy toolkit, behavioral economics gives us additional motives for public policy intervention, and I'll give you some examples of this in a few minutes. It gives us additional policy tools that complement the traditional public policy tools. And then it gives us ways to increase the effectiveness of traditional public policy tools by giving us insights into how to better deploy those traditional public policy tools, such as incentives. David Halpern was the head of the UK's Behavioral Insights team, which was the first formal approach to incorporating behavioral insights into formal government policy making. And he said, a lot of our policy models traditionally are based on a rather naive understanding of what drives behavior. But if you have a more intelligent, nuanced account of how people make decisions, you can design policy that is more effective, less costly, and makes life easier for most citizens. So that's the motivation for thinking more expansively about the public policy toolkit and the reasons why government intervention might be warranted. And one of the reasons that certainly aligns with my motivations in becoming a behavioral economist. I'm often asked, well, what is behavioral economics? And unable to find a definition that I liked out there, I crafted my own definition. So my definition is behavioral economics incorporates insights from economics and other behaviorally oriented disciplines, including psychology, sociology, anthropology, and cognitive neuroscience, to enrich standard economic models in ways that improve our ability to understand and predict human behavior, market outcomes, and public policy. What I want to do today is talk about how behavioral economics informs the public policy toolkit, specifically in the case of thinking about the role of public policy in encouraging people to get vaccinated, which is something on the minds of many public policymakers these days. So I'm going to throw out a question for you to think about. Did you get a flu shot last fall or winter? Now, this last fall, winter was kind of a funny time. So maybe you might think back not to fall of 2020, but think back to fall of 2019 or many falls previous to that. Were you in the typical pattern of going to get a flu shot or not? So public policy types, health policy types would advocate that most of us should be getting a flu vaccine. So this is a chart. The light blue bars show the target vaccination rate that public health officials in the US are aiming to achieve for the various different demographic groups that are listed on the bottom. And you can see it ranges between 80 and 90%. And with the exception of the adults age 65 and older, which is this group right here, the actual vaccination rate achieved in a typical year is less than half of what the public health officials are trying to target. So there's substantial room for improvement, and this has motivated a lot of research into how can we get people to better comply with public policy health recommendations around vaccination. And I've done a little bit of work in this area. And so I want to describe how I think about what behavioral economics brings to the table in terms of solving this public health problem. But I want to start out by framing it in terms of traditional economic models. So a classically trained economist would think about the case of influenza vaccines as a market failure in the case of a positive externality. So there's a socially beneficial demand for flu vaccines. There's a supply that's dictated in the marketplace, and there's some place where the supply and the demand curve intersect, and that's the socially optimal level of vaccination in society, Q star. And the problem arises because the actual demand for vaccines is generated by individuals' private benefit, and their private benefit doesn't take into account that if I get the flu vaccine, I confer a positive benefit on everyone that I interact with because I won't be transmitting the flu to them. And that's going to lead to too low a level of vaccinations in society. And that's going to lead to what economists call deadweight loss. This triangle, this pink triangle, is the valuable surplus in the economy that we're missing out on because too few people are getting vaccinated. Now, the traditional public policy tool that's used in the vaccination space is to try and subsidize either vaccine supply or vaccine demand in order to get us closer to the socially optimal outcome. So in terms of this graph right here, that would involve giving people a subsidy to go get their flu vaccine or subsidizing providers who are giving out flu vaccines. And this light blue rectangle, that's the cost of the subsidy that you would have to put in place to move the initial outcome up to the socially optimal quantity of vaccines. So this policy, if well conceived and if all of our assumptions hold, will work, but it's actually a fairly expensive approach to remedying this problem, or at least in the graph, it looks like a fairly expensive approach. So other public policy tools have been to mandate vaccination. We do that with in public schools with school children. How well will these tools work? As I've already noted, subsidies can be quite expensive, and mandates can be politically tenuous and hard to implement, especially for adults if you don't have a way to, like we're not going to let your child in school, a way to enforce compliance. So this is something that I think we're going to run up against with the COVID-19 vaccine as vaccination rates go up. Right now, many of us are highly motivated, but eventually we're going to be left with the hardcore individuals who don't want to get vaccinated, and it's hard to know how you can politically enforce compliance on that group. And then the question is, how much do these approaches actually change behavior? And that's an interesting question to ask because the flu vaccine is not an expensive vaccine and tends to be highly subsidized. So if Syracuse University is like most other universities in the country, they will offer the vaccines for free to employees and students and still get a take-up rate well below what public health officials would advocate. So the way I like to think about these types of problems is to ask the question, well, what are the barriers to behavior change? Why is it that the public health authorities say that 80 to 90% of the population should get the flu vaccine and less than half are actually following through? So this is a question that I regularly ask my students when I teach class. And the interesting thing is that almost nobody answers that the reason they didn't get their flu shot was because of the cost, that the flu shot was too expensive. not surprising given how extensively we subsidize flu vaccines in this country. And yet, what's the public policy tool that we're using to encourage vaccination? It's subsidizing vaccination, even though that's not the problem that individuals cite. What do people say instead when you ask, well, why didn't you get your flu shot last fall? What do they tell you? First of all, they say, I forgot. So they had good intentions, they understand this is a good idea, and they forgot. They just never got around to it. Or they tell you it was inconvenient. So the free flu clinic that my employer was offering was in a location and I had to walk 10 minutes and it was raining and I didn't want to go. Or they tell you that they never get the flu, or, so they're superhuman. Or that they think the vaccine causes the flu, and those are mistaken beliefs. So these are the actual reasons why people don't get the flu vaccine, and reducing the cost to zero is unlikely to solve for these actual barriers to behavior change. So I like to think about a set of questions in terms of these types of public policy problems. And the first question is, if you've got a gap between what you as a policymaker want and what either firms or individuals are doing, do people or organizations want to change their behavior? There are a surprising number of public policy problems where individuals' desires are actually well aligned with policymaker desires, and individuals would tell you they would like to change their behavior, but they don't. So then what are the barriers? What's driving the gap between intentions and action? In some cases, there is a difference of opinion. So if the answer is no, how can we change what people want to do? And in that case, a financial incentive can work. You bundle something people don't want with something they do want, which is money, and they might be more likely to do it. But there are other ways we might be able to change what people want, including through better information provision and through various behaviorally informed interventions. And then which approaches are going to work best for whom and in what circumstances. And then you use this to drive your approach to making policy. So let me just illustrate in the traditional graph how a couple of these things might work. So here's the graph I showed you a few minutes ago. And we have this gap between the social benefit, the demand from a social standpoint, D2, and the observed market demand, which we presume is the amount of vaccination individuals want. But let's suppose that individuals really have a demand curve that looks like D3. And the problem, the big gap, is a gap between intentions and actions. Individuals are just not following through on what they would really want for themselves and for the benefit of society. And notice in this graph, if we could help close the gap between intentions and actions, we would get 75% of the way there in terms of getting to the socially optimal outcome. And there might be cheaper ways to close that gap than by providing a subsidy. Or let's suppose that here's our observed private demand, and this is driven in part by the faulty beliefs that individuals have that they are superhuman and will never catch the flu, or that they will catch the flu from getting the vaccine. If we could correct those beliefs, the demand curve would shift, and maybe that would get us to the socially optimal amount of vaccination in the society at a lower cost than the subsidies shown earlier. So I'm going to go through a few examples of some research that I have done and some other people have done on flu vaccination, because we happen to have a large body of research on that, that illustrate some behaviorally informed approaches to closing the intention-action gap. And then one study at the end that tries to get at shifting the demand curve here. And what I want to do is try and convince you that there are actually a fair number of pretty cost-effective ways to increase vaccination rates that give you more bang for the buck than a traditional subsidy. So let me start off with an example that has to do with the relationship between the location of a flu shot clinic and the likelihood that people get vaccinated. So this was a study that I worked on a few years ago in cooperation with a large employer in the Midwest. And at their corporate headquarters, they have 2 buildings that are connected by a covered walkway. So you can get from one building to the next without suffering from the harsh effects of the elements if it's raining or snowing or the sun is beating down. And the walkway was set up so that when you entered a new building, you had to swipe your ID card. So this was to make sure that someone who wasn't supposed to be there wasn't getting in, but it had the convenient side effect that they had data of everyone's traffic patterns between these 2 buildings, or they had data of all of the employees' traffic patterns between these 2 buildings. So we got that traffic pattern data, and we could look at how often employees walk between building 1 and building 2 and keep track of that before the company opened up its annual fall flu vaccine clinic, where they offered free vaccines to all of the employees in both buildings. So we track the mobility patterns between the 2 buildings. November comes and the company opens up a flu shot clinic in the corner of building 2, right next to the doorway that you would go through to get from building 1 to building 2. Well, what do we find? We find that people who were located in building 1 and have lots of reasons to go between building 1 and building 2 in the course of their normal daily activities, we find that 47% of them get a flu shot. Whereas a similarly situated employee in building 1 who has the same physical distance to get to building 2, but in the normal habit of their day-to-day work wouldn't ordinarily go to building 2, only 40% of them get a flu shot. So what do we learn from this? We learn that it's not your actual distance from the flu clinic that matters, it's your functional distance. And are you going by where the clinic will eventually be located on a frequent basis or not? Because if you're going by the location of the clinic, 2 things happen. Number 1, when you walk by the clinic, it will remind you that you really should get your flu vaccine. And number 2, when you walk by the clinic, it might happen to be that on one of those trips, it would be really convenient for you to just pop in and get your flu vaccine. So locating the clinic might be a low cost but very effective way to increase vaccination rates relative to giving everyone a subsidy as a way to encourage them to make that long trek from building 1 to building 2 to get their flu shot. A second study, and this is one that I didn't do, but is an extension of some of the work that Len talked about in his introduction, some of my work on using defaults to increase savings plan participation. This is a study on giving individuals a default flu shot appointment time. So employees at a large organization were sent an email in the days leading up to the organization's annual free flu shot clinic for employees. And the employees were divided into 2 groups. Half of the employees got an email telling them that the flu clinic was going to happen next week. And there was a link in the email. You could click on it. And if you clicked on it, you would be taken to a scheduling tool and you could sign up for an appointment time. And if you signed up, you would get an email a day before the flu clinic reminding you that tomorrow you're supposed to go get your flu vaccine. So that's the opt-in condition. The other half of employees received an email that assigned them a time to go get the flu shot. And there was a hyperlink in the email that you could click on to opt out of getting a flu shot or to change the time. And if you didn't opt out of getting a shot altogether, you would get a later reminder email. Now, the interesting thing here relative to the savings case is just giving someone a default time does not give them the flu shot. They still need to actually get out of their chair, walk down the hall, go wherever they need to go to get the flu shot. It requires some action for compliance to happen. Well, what happened in this study Those in the opt-in condition, click here to sign up for an appointment time. A third of them received a flu shot at the vaccination clinic. Those who were given a default appointment time, 45% of them got a flu shot. Now so this is a 12 percentage point increase at zero cost. The cost of sending that email to employees was zero, because they sent every employee an email. They just changed the content of what was in the email. Now the true effect is likely much larger, because as we all know, we don't answer all of our emails, right? So the actual fraction of people who answered the email is less than 100%. So the true compliance among those who read the email is likely higher than the 12 percentage point difference that is pictured here. Now, what is really interesting, however, is to break down what happened. So here I've got on the left, the group that got the default flu appointment, the 45%, and on the right, those who had to opt in, the 33%. So that's the data that I just showed you, but now it's more like a table than a bar chart. Look over here to those who got the default flu shot appointment. So here's what's really interesting. Very few people went in and canceled their appointment. Okay, so this would be consistent with not reading the email. Very few people go in and cancel their appointment. So most people keep the appointment. But of the people who kept the appointment, many of them don't show up. So only about half of them actually get vaccinated. So that could also be they didn't read the email. But of the people who got vaccinated, only half of them went in at their designated appointment time. The other half of the people were given a default appointment. It meant they got a reminder. And they went and got their flu shot, but it was at a completely different time, which in the case of a flu clinic is fine, because you can show up whenever and people don't really care. But just the power of setting a default led to a significantly higher fraction of people getting vaccinated. Another study, and this is another one that I was a part of, looked at the role of helping people plan. So remember, some of the barriers that I talked about up at the top of the list was people saying, I forgot. I intended to get a flu shot and I forgot. So there is a large literature in psychology on helping people follow through on their good intentions. It's called the implementations intentions literature. That's a little bit of a mouthful. I like to just talk about it as planning, how to get people to follow through on their plans. So we worked with a large company that was holding a free vaccine clinic for their employees. And the employees were all sent out a paper form that told them the dates and times of the clinic. So you can see that down here. And the employees were divided into 3 different groups. So 1/3 got a letter that explained the importance of getting a flu shot, and then had a little box in there. Here's when you can go get your free flu shot. So that was 1/3 of the employees. The next third of the employees got the same letter, but the box, instead of looking like this, had a little additional piece up here, which said, many people find it helpful to make a plan for getting their shot. You can write your plan here. And it has a picture of a pencil. Write down the day of the week and the month and the day you're going to go get your flu shot. I'm going to get it on Wednesday, October 10th. Or maybe I should say here, Wednesday, October 28th, since that was actually one of the options. And then the third group of employees got a very similar box, only here it said, write down the day of the week, the month, the day, and the time. I'm going to go in on Wednesday, October 28th at 10:30 in the morning. Now, there was no way to force compliance with this. This was just sent into mail. You didn't have to open the mail. It might have looked like junk mail. You could open it. You didn't have to actually take your pencil and write in an appointment date or appointment time. So this is, in the grand scheme of things, I would call a fairly weak intervention, but it's also totally low cost. It's free. You're already sending the form out telling people they should go get their flu shot. What did we find? If there was no planning prompt at all, about 1/3 of employees went in to get the flu shot. Note that this third is remarkably consistent with the 33% in the study I showed you on default flu shots with when you don't have a default, totally different company. But consistent with that, when we ask employees to plan a date, it goes up to about 36%. When we ask them to plan a date and a time, it goes up to 37%. So zero cost. It's not a huge, it's not like, the savings results that Len showed you, but for zero cost, we've gotten a 4 percentage point increase in the fraction of employees who go get a flu shot. We then ran a related study trying to get individuals to go get a colonoscopy. Now that's a bigger ask of people than going to get a flu shot. And employees were sent a mailer reminding them that they were of the age when getting a colonoscopy would be a good thing to do. And some of them got a mailer and it had a literal Post-it note on it, but nothing was on the Post-it note. And some of the employees got an email and the Post-it note had written on it, "Don't forget your colonoscopy appointment with," and then you're supposed to write in the name of your doctor and then write down the date. And in this intervention, giving people no planning prompt, the empty sticky note, 6% of them signed up for a colonoscopy. Plan a date, 7%. Once again, not a huge effect. Proportionately, the effect here on a proportionate basis is almost exactly the same as over here. But we then took this and we did a little follow-up study. We asked just random people, think Amazon Mechanical Turks, who do you think is more forgetful and who do you think is less forgetful? So are men or women, who's more forgetful? People with children, are they more or less forgetful than people without children? Age, are people who are 75 more or less forgetful than people who are 45? And then we stratified the results, these results over here on who gets a colonoscopy by these different characteristics. So the overall result is about a 1 percentage point increase in the likelihood that you get a colonoscopy. People think that men are more forgetful than women. I'm not telling you that that's a truth. I'm just telling you that when you ask a random sample of people in the population, they tell you that men are more forgetful than women, and this intervention has almost no effect on women and a 2 percentage point effect on men. People tell you that individuals who have children are more forgetful than individuals who don't have children. Much bigger effect for individuals who have children and are presumably more forgetful. People who need a second reminder are classified as more forgetful. It's more impactful for them. People who are older, other people believe are more forgetful, and this intervention has a bigger effect on them. And no difference on the generosity of your health insurance coverage. No reason to think that people with more generous health insurance coverage are more or less forgetful than other people. So the intervention is actually targeting the people, is having its biggest effect on the people who other people think are more forgetful. I think that's an interesting result. Okay, the last study I want to talk about, or a set of studies, is from a working paper that just came out a few weeks ago. It was posted on SSRN, and despite having only been posted a few weeks ago, it is now my third most downloaded paper on SSRN. And I am a little tiny bit player in this paper. So this was a collaborative effort of a few dozen researchers at a dozen different universities, all working together under the umbrella of the Behavior Change for Good initiative at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And a collaborative effort between two different health systems was set up to examine different approaches to encouraging people to get a flu shot. But in this case, the encouragement was last fall. So this study was run kind of November, December, and data collection is actually going through March, but most of the data is coming from the fall, and testing 18 different approaches to providing individuals with a text message reminder to go get a flu shot. So it's mostly around the content of the message, not the type of intervention. So all of these are text messages or something you can link to through a text message. So this is small print on this screen, and I don't expect any of you to look at this, but all 18 of the interventions had a positive effect on the likelihood of getting a flu shot, although the standard error bars are wide on some of them, so they're not necessarily statistically different than zero. I'm going to talk about the most effective intervention, and then I'm going to talk about the one that I worked on. So the most effective intervention was an intervention in which you received a text that said, "John, this is a reminder that a flu vaccine has been reserved for your appointment with Dr. Smith," or a variant, "A flu shot has been reserved for you to receive at your appointment tomorrow. Reply yes if you want this shot held for you, no if you don't." So something that requires an action on your part. So in the control group that didn't receive any sort of a text message, 42% of people went and got their flu shot. And the most effective iteration of the "we've reserved a shot for you" increased vaccination rates by about 4.5%, and then two other variants by about 3%, or 3 percentage points. So once again, low cost to send a text message reminding someone of a flu shot appointment, and reminding them that the flu vaccine has been reserved for you. This is your flu vaccine for the taking, come and get it, is more effective than just reminding you to show up for your appointment with Dr. Smith tomorrow. The particular intervention I was involved in was one where individuals were given a quick little health behavior quiz. So yesterday, did you walk at least 10,000 steps? Yes or no? And then a few minutes later, how about your diet? Did you eat 4 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables yesterday? Yes or no? And then 10 minutes later, and finally, did you sleep at least 8 hours last night? Again, yes or no? And we're trying to set people up to say, you know what, I didn't walk 10,000 steps. I didn't eat 4 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables, and I didn't get 8 hours of sleep last night. But those are tough goals to achieve. It's flu season, and getting a flu shot at your upcoming appointment is an easy thing you can do to be healthy. So you can feel better about yourself if you'll just go get that flu vaccine. So the control group that just says you've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow, 42% get the flu shot. When we give them this hard health behaviors quiz, so that's what I've just showed you, it's about 45%. We had a second version of the quiz, which asked easy questions like, did you walk 2,000 steps yesterday? Or did you eat a single serving of fruit and vegetables? That led to about a 44% increase. So this is a way to try and shape preferences to make you more interested in getting a flu shot by contrasting how easy or difficult the flu shot is with some other behaviors that you are or aren't engaging in. So coming back to the framework we talked about earlier, what are some of the behaviorally informed tools to increase vaccination? Well, we've talked about changing the location of the flu clinic to both increase visibility and to reduce the travel time. So it lowers the cost of getting vaccinated, not the financial cost, but the time cost, and it serves as a visual reminder to those who are forgetful. Setting a default appointment time, helping people make a concrete and specific plan. Note that this planning literature, you may be very familiar with this because this is now what all of the Get Out the Vote campaigns are doing during significant elections, is trying to get people to make a concrete plan to go vote. And then a reminder which creates a sense of obligation, the flu shot's reserved for you, and a reminder that creates a contrast effect. Getting the flu shot is something easy that you can do. So what I haven't shown you is what do the effect of traditional incentives look like. So this is from a study that I was not part of, but one of my, or a couple of my collaborators on some of this vaccine research were a part of. And this was a project to evaluate the cost of effectiveness of different approaches to encouraging vaccination and some other behaviors as well. So if you look at the number of adults vaccinated per $1 spent on approaches to increase vaccination rates, providing a financial incentive to individuals leads to about 1.8 people on average getting vaccinated. Providing a subsidized or free vaccine, about one person vaccinated for every dollar spent. Whereas the planning prompt study that I showed you, the magnitude of the effect might not have seemed huge. It was about a 4 or 5 percentage point effect, but the cost was zero. So the number of people vaccinated per dollar spent was 12.8, and the default appointment was 3.7. So on the cost effectiveness metric, these are really powerful approaches to increasing vaccination rates in a cost-effective fashion. In the interest of time, I had a couple of slides on savings research. I'm not going to go through those other than to say, when it comes to the barriers for saving, same thing. No one cites the interest rate is too low. That's why I'm not saving. People do not tell you that. They tell you it's hard. They tell you they've procrastinated. They tell you they've forgotten, things like that. So it's not surprising that if you look at the types of interventions that have been studied, the interventions that are most effective are the ones that are targeting the actual barriers to getting people to save. And one of the fun things I do in my class is I ask people to predict how effective different interventions are going to be, and then I compare the actual effects with what they predict, and they're almost always off, which is a lot of fun. So if you do the same cost effectiveness comparison here, these are all financial incentives. There's the cost effectiveness to increasing annual contributions by $1 spent. And here's the cost effectiveness of just requiring people to make a choice today and not allowing them to procrastinate, forestalling the procrastination channel. Okay, I'm going to jump through a couple of slides there and just wrap up by saying, what does behavioral economics bring to the table? This is what I said earlier. It brings additional motives for public policy, things like inattention and for forgetfulness, mistaken beliefs. It brings additional policy tools to help agents execute on their preferences to close the intention action gap, and tools to help shape preferences and bring individual preferences into, better alignment with what is in the best interests of society overall. And it also gives us ways to increase the effectiveness of traditional public policy tools. So for those of you who are interested in behavioral economics, I'll just tell you that I have had a lot of fun working in this field. I had not a single iota of training in behavioral economics. I came to this out of a desire to better understand the policy problems that I was interested in and to better understand the solutions that could work. And it's been a really rewarding and fun thing for me to do. So if you have any interest in this, I can give you my endorsement. This is a fun type of research to engage in. And I would now be delighted to take your questions.
This is the point at which there's uproarious applause, but everybody's muted, so you can't tell. Bridget, that was fantastic. So I have a question from one of our grad students. Considering that you're not trained as a psychologist, how do you form hypotheses about behavioral interventions? Do you spend time reading behavioral literature from other disciplines or partner with researchers who are already very familiar with behavioral theory?
That is a great question. And the answer is a bit of both of those, but really doing a lot of introspection. So we are all people whose decisions are driven by psychology as much as they're, or more than they're driven by economic incentives and other things like that. So I've found that a lot of times personal introspection gets you a long ways, even if you're not trained in psychology, because we all know the psychology of our own minds. And then you talk to other people and you find out, well, is the way my mind works, is that the way your mind works as well? And once you start talking to 24 people and everyone thinks the same way, pretty soon you're onto something.
Do you have any idea, or does behavioral economics tell us anything about how government can affect people's knowledge or behavior when there's so much mistrust for government as there is now? And I'm thinking particularly about COVID, where the people least inclined to be vaccinated appear to be the people who really distrust the current government. So it seems like a huge hurdle. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly one strategy that public health authorities have been using is to get people who other individuals trust to publicly show themselves getting vaccinated. So, I mean, that was a missed opportunity for Donald Trump to stealthily get his COVID vaccine in private. He believed in it enough to get the vaccine, but didn't take advantage of the opportunity he had as the president to do it in a way that would encourage other people to do likewise. But there's the representative, I'm gonna mess up on her name, who was in the news, Len knows who I'm talking about, whose husband, Republican representative, whose husband died of COVID between the time when he was elected and when he should have taken office. And he got COVID and he passed away, and she was elected to fill his seat in the special election. And she's now on the news media saying, learn from my husband, go get your COVID vaccine. So I think those are, and are they going to work for everyone? Maybe not, but they will work for some people. And the case in point would be my father-in-law, who is a very strong Trump supporter and very much was of the mind that all the media around COVID was overblown and the deaths were being overreported, and this was not that big of a deal, despite the fact that at the age of 84, he was spending all of his time secluded in his house and not seeing people. And when the vaccines in the state of Utah started to be available for people over the age of 80 after they'd gone through healthcare workers and some of the first responders, some of the, very senior and revered people in the state were on the news media getting their vaccines. And that then opened a conversation with my father-in-law. Well, if this person can get the vaccine and this person who you respect, don't you think you should do it too? And by the end of the week, he had a vaccine appointment. So will it work for everyone? No, but it'll work for some people.
Someone asks about whether anybody's tried to put a vaccine appointment directly on a person's calendar by sending them an appointment, a calendar invite. It seems like a good idea, but do you know of anybody who studied that?
I don't know of anyone who has studied that particular approach for vaccines. I do that all the time as the dean. I send people default calendar appointments to completely optional events, and the attendance is way higher than if we just send them an email saying, we're doing this, come if you want. So shortly after COVID started, I started having town halls. And initially we had them every 2 weeks, and now we're down to about every 6 weeks because there isn't as much news to report. But when I put them in I just send a default calendar invite, I get 75% of my employees to show up for those town halls. Mm-hmm. And if we just send an email that says, we're having this meeting, come if you want, we get a third.
Yeah. And the same person said, do you have any ideas for increasing student response rates? And I should say, this was my great behavioral economics triumph, which was I was having trouble with response rates, and I started saying, well, the majority of your classmates have already signed up. and all of a sudden, everybody else signed up.
Yeah. So that was for a vaccine or for something?
No, just responding to teaching evaluations.
Oh, yeah. So the most effective way to get students to respond to teaching evaluations is not to release their grades until they filled out the evaluation. I know a number of universities have done that. But yeah, you can also, tell them most of your classmates have done this. So I did a variant of that, not with students, but a few years ago, I was leading the tenure and promotion committee for one of my colleagues who is a behavioral economist. And this is when I was at Harvard. So we had sent out to probably 24 people to get outside letters from other scholars evaluating this individual's research. And we had to get the report done, and there were still, 3 or 4 people who hadn't sent their letters in, and they were all behavioral economists. And so I sent them a letter, and I used every behavioral trick in the toolbook. So I told them that 9 out of 10 of your colleagues have already returned their letter, and please let me know your concrete and specific plan, the date and the time and all of this, when you're going to send your letter back. And they all immediately replied with their letters and appreciated the humor that was used.
Good. Another grad student asks, what are some of the common mistakes that lawmakers or policymakers make when attempting to apply these behavioral economics tools?
I would say the biggest mistake is not taking the time to understand the context in which the particular tool that they're interested in using was deployed, and what is it about that context that made it effective. So they automatically assume that if it worked in this context, it's going to work over in this other completely different policy issue with a different population, without really understanding what are the differences between these two different contexts, and why might one context make that tool likely to be more effective or less effective in a way that allows you to better generalize to other situations.
One of our alums asks the question, and she was referring back to being inundated with text messages during the election season, and she has started ignoring them. Is there some point at which there are too many texts or reminders? That's to say, if every healthcare provider or other service provider started texting us reminders, would it just become like email?
Yes, and the answer is absolutely yes. So that's a great illustration of what I was just talking about. So the effectiveness of a text message when you're not getting very many of them is going to be very different than the effectiveness of a text message when you're getting a lot of them. So if you're in the situation where people are getting a lot of them, then your challenge is, how do I make this message novel or entertaining or engaging in some other way so that people will pay attention to it? Or do I then maybe then I send something in the mail, right? So you have to understand the context and what's the barrier driving behavior, so you can come up with something, an intervention that's appropriate to the context.
A colleague asks about enlisting the private sector. How effective would corporate mandates be in incentivizing people to get the vaccine? For example, to fly or attend a sporting or a music event. Are there types of people who attend these events or who travel? Are the types of people who attend these events or travel likely to be the same people who would get the vaccine anyway? Or is this a way to target people who might not trust government but also want to engage in travel or recreation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my guess is we'll probably end up with some natural experiments on this over the next few months. I mean, my guess is that if Trump supporting country music. I realize I'm stereotyping here. Country music star decree that you can only attend my concert in Texas if you've had a COVID-19 vaccine. And just you got to show up with your vaccine card. My guess is you'd get a big jump in compliance, both because of kind of a celebrity endorsement effect, but also because people will decide, well, I really do want to go to that concert. And
there was a story in, I think it was the Washington Post, might have been the New York Times today, about vaccine passports. And they interviewed a bunch of people who said, oh, okay, if I need the passport to go to a concert or something, I'll get it. Or to travel. One person said, if the government is going to make me do it, then I'll just change my travel plans.
and that's what some people will say, and they'll actually follow through on it. But most people will say it, and then a week later they'll be like, it's less cost to just go get the vaccine than to change my travel plans.
Yeah. Someone asked about applying behavioral incentives to encourage people to give up or cut down on smoking. I think this will work better than excise taxes, which seem to only condition people to pay more for their addictions.
Yeah, so I haven't done any research on this, but there has been some behaviorally informed research to try and encourage smoking cessation. So there's a study, Kevin Volpe at the University of Pennsylvania is one of the co-authors, and they use financial incentives, but they're tied to behavioral markers. So we'll pay you this much if you complete a class that kind of teaches you what are the challenges you're going to face and what kind of strategies will be most effective. And then we're going to pay you if you're still not smoking in 3 months, and then we're going to pay you more if you're still not smoking in 6 months, and then we're going to pay you more if you're still not smoking in a year or 18 months. And you get people, you certainly get attrition, people who quit smoking and then they pick it up again, but having this kind of series of milestones that you need to reach does lead to higher cessation rates than not having an incentive at all. So that would be an example of a behaviorally informed incentive. The behavioral economics is helping you better structure the incentive to encourage people to stop smoking.
A few years ago, we had Deirdre McCloskey speak, and she's a skeptic of behavioral economics. She basically thinks it's arrogant and paternalistic for the government to try to manipulate what people choose to do.
But that's all of government policy. The totality, right? Isn't it? Right? The totality of government policy. Yeah. Why does government intervene? Is to manipulate what people do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. My response was that if government was going to try to do it, they should try to do things that would actually work, because otherwise it'll have unintended consequences.
Or do things that are cost effective so that you're spending less money on it.
Yep. I'd like to get Deirdre back with everyone else who's spoken in this series, and she's got very strong views, as you probably know. Looking at some of the other questions, do you have any thoughts on overcoming the additional unique considerations associated with COVID vaccine on volunteer uptake, specifically maximizing the number of doses per vial and the associated time constraints associated with actually, I don't understand the question, associated with the thawing and distribution process? Is there anything else you wanted to say about COVID?
I'm not sure I completely understand that question either. I don't know if it's about thinking about, do you want to spread the 2-dose vaccines? There's been some talk about if 1 dose is 80% effective and 2 doses is 90% effective, should we stop giving the second doses and get more people first doses? Or I can't quite tell what the question's trying to get at, but.
So the questioner, I think, just clarified that they were concerned that if you have rigid rules for who gets the vaccine, that you end up wasting some of the vaccine. So, are there ways to basically encourage the vaccines to be used more efficiently while still targeting the population you want to reach?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. And there have been some interesting private market solutions to this. So there was I think this was in the New York Times a week or two ago, some entrepreneurial minded person has come up with an app where if you're a vaccine provider and you've got leftovers, you can put in the app, I've got 15 extra doses. And people who are eligible then have 15 minutes to get to the location and queue up for the vaccine. And that's a way to use up the extra doses without having to incur the public wrath of giving them to your relatives or your friends who don't meet the current guidelines. That's a problem that's going to go away in a few weeks, though.
Yeah, I think that's right. Someone made a comment: behavioral economics can be applied to reducing waste and improving recycling. For example, in Switzerland, residents are required to purchase taxed city-sanctioned garbage bags from the cities in order to dispose of their trash. Residents are encouraged to recycle the paper, glass, aluminum, and plastic trash for free. And there are recycle depots all over the city. This encourages residents to recycle as much as they can in order to reduce the amount of garbage bags they must purchase. So
yeah. That's an interesting. The thing I like about that example is it's an interesting two-pronged approach.
Mm-hmm.
So you're both discouraging the behavior that you don't want, which is throwing things into the trash, by making people buy the special city-sanctioned trash bags. But at the same time, you're encouraging recycling by having all of these publicly available receptacles. And with the public receptacles, you're lowering the cost of recycling, but you're also doing it in a way that's very visible to other people, because you can see your neighbors taking their recyclables to the little recycling station. So I think that's a nice example of a kind of two-pronged, behaviorally informed approach: discourage the bad and encourage the good at the same time.
Someone asked whether you think it would be more effective to have roving vaccination sites or co-location in shopping centers. I guess this is related to your study about the travel distance to get flu shots.
Yeah, and I think the answer might depend on what kind of a geographic environment you're in, and also where you are in the rollout of the vaccine. So, at this stage right now, where you've still got a lot of people who are highly motivated to go get the vaccine, the efficient thing is probably just to have a great big giant vaccine clinic, because people will come. But in another couple of months, when the people who really want it are all vaccinated, and then you're dealing with the people who are on the margins, that's when you need to start thinking about, how do I reduce the costs of vaccination? And that's when you might want to say, well, let's open up the clinic in the in the shopping mall or the grocery store, or wherever it is that people are going, that'll reduce the costs. For flu vaccines, I don't know if this has been tried and it doesn't work, or if this is a good idea and someone just needs to try it. I'm not sure why they don't have flu vaccine clinics in airports, because think of all the time people spend waiting in airports.
I'm not sure you want to encourage unvaccinated people to go to the airports, though.
Well, not the COVID vaccine,
right.
but the flu.
But flu, yeah.
In a normal year, it would seem really efficient to have a flu vaccine set up in the airport.
That's a good idea. Someone wrote, it seems that motivating those who are unmotivated to do something, or actually following up on it, requires a different set of tools than motivating those who are motivated not to do something. What are some of the patterns that have emerged about the types of behavioral interventions that are effective for the different groups? How do you get people to do things? What's different about trying to get people to do things that they're not inclined to do versus trying to get people to do things that they are inclined to do.
Well, so the motivations for in the one case, there's a gap between what you want for yourself and what you're actually doing.
Mhm.
And in the other case, it's a gap between what you want for yourself and what society wants you to do. So in the first case, where it's a gap between what I want to do and what I'm actually doing, those are those are cases where defaults work well because they make it, the follow through is automatic, or requiring people to make a choice, or put in the flu clinic in a convenient location, things that reduce inattention, reduce forgetfulness. All of those things are going to work well. When it's I want to do X and society wants me to do Y, you have to find a way to make doing Y attractive. So that's a case where a financial incentive might work, right?
Mhm.
I don't really want to go get a COVID shot, but if you're going to pay me $100 to do it, sure, I'll go get my COVID shot. And there's a whole bunch of other things that you can pay me to do, as well. But there might be cheaper ways. So maybe it's, all of my friends are doing this, and I don't want to have to keep on justifying why I didn't do this. I think it's a stupid idea, but every time I get together with my friends, they're harassing me. Therefore, I might as well just go along. And do it. So social pressure, can work in that context, or, tying something that people want, the concert, with something they don't want. That's how you get people to change their wants, or a penalty if you don't do it. The incentive is you avoid the penalty. It could be financial, it could be non-financial.
Does behavioral economics tell us anything about how to get information to people or improve the quality of the information that they're acting on?
So yes, there have been some studies on that, and it is context specific. So there have been some studies. If you think about it, this is what marketing is all about, right? Marketing is how do you give people information that they will then follow through and act on. So, in some cases, it's making the message shorter and clearer. So there have been some examples where that actually works pretty well. So take the 10-page government legalese and turn it into 1 page of readable English and highlight the most important stuff at the top. Some cases that works. Bigger fonts, having voice in addition to, some people video or audio is better than sending them a letter. Animation, there are different things that have been tried. One interesting study tried doing some of these things in communications from the government, and it didn't work. So when people are getting communication from the government, they want it to look official. Otherwise, they don't trust it. They think that it's not coming from the government. So so you kind of have to, you have to test. I think one thing that we've learned is that psychology really is context dependent. The way we think about things depends on the context that we're in. And that means you have to, test and evaluate and then revise and then retest and, figure out what's going to work in the context you're interested in.
Bridget, thank you so much for speaking to us today. This was fantastic.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Bye-bye.